Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. I ain't leaving. The words cut through the dusty air like a blade, and Caleb Mason felt his heart slam against his ribs as he stared down into the cellar of what was supposed to be his fresh start. The woman crouched in the shadows below, clutched a rusty shotgun with hands that shook like autumn leaves, her dark hair wild around a face streaked with tears and grime. Her dress, once probably sky blue, was now the color of desperation and too many nights sleeping on dirt floors. "Please," she whispered, and the word cracked like kindling. "I got nowhere else to go." Caleb's jaw tightened, every muscle in his weathered face pulling taut. He'd paid good money for this abandoned saloon in Copper Ridge, Montana, thinking he could drink away the ghosts of his dead wife in peace. The last thing he needed was some scared girl with eyes like a cornered deer making his chest ache with feelings he'd buried 6 feet under with Sarah. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper against wood. Her face crumpled, and something dangerous flickered in those brown eyes. Not fear anymore, but the kind of wild desperation that made even strong men do foolish things. The shotgun's barrel lifted just a fraction of an inch. And in that moment, as the Montana wind howled through the broken saloon doors and dust motes danced in the fading light, Caleb Mason realized his quiet life of grief and whiskey was about to become something else entirely. Something that might just kill him. Or save him. He'd find out soon enough which. The story of how Caleb Mason's broken heart led him to buy the Devil's Den Saloon starts 3 days earlier, when he rode into Copper Ridge with nothing but a saddlebag full of regrets and enough money to disappear. He'd sold his ranch in Wyoming after Sarah died. Every fence post, every acre of grazing land, every damn sunrise reminded him of the life they'd planned and would never have. The consumption took her slow, and he'd watched helplessly as the woman who'd tamed his wild heart faded away like morning mist. The saloon sat at the end of Main Street like a broken tooth, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. Perfect, just like him. "You sure about this, mister?" asked Tom Brennan, the town's banker, as they stood outside the ramshackle building. Brennan was a thin man with nervous hands that fluttered like bird wings when he talked. "Place has been empty for near on 2 years. Old Heinrich Mueller ran it till he died. Had a daughter, but she up and vanished right after the funeral." Caleb counted out the bills without looking up. "I'm sure. Might be haunted," Brennan tried again, mopping his brow despite the October chill. "Folks say they hear things at night, crying mostly." "Good thing I don't believe in ghosts." Caleb's voice was flat as a gravestone. What he didn't say was that he was already haunted by one that mattered. Brennan took the money with shaking hands. Keys on the nail beside the door. "You need anything else?" "I won't." Caleb tipped his hat and walked away, leaving the banker standing in the dust. That first night, he'd swept out enough dirt to fill a grave and set up his bedroll in what used to be the saloon's main room. The bar was scarred oak, solid as his resolve to drink himself into forgetting. He had 3 bottles of whiskey and all the time in the world, but drinking in silence got old fast, and by the second day, he started exploring. The saloon was bigger than it looked from outside. A main room with the bar, stairs leading up to what had probably been rented rooms, and a door behind the bar that opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The cellar, he figured. Good place to store liquor. Or bodies, his grief-addled brain supplied helpfully. He'd grabbed a lantern and headed down, expecting to find empty shelves and maybe some rats. Instead, he'd found her, a young woman maybe 22 or 23 years old, huddled in the corner like something wild and wounded. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then she'd lunged for the shotgun propped against the wall, and here they were. "What's your name?" he asked, not moving from the top of the stairs. She kept the gun trained on him, but her voice was small. Katherine Mueller, the banker's missing daughter, of course." "Your pa's dead." "I know." Tears tracked through the grime on her cheeks. "I've been here since the funeral. Living in a cellar like some kind of animal." Her chin lifted, and for a moment he saw fire instead of fear. Better than the alternatives I've been offered. Something in her tone made his jaw clench. In towns like this, a young woman alone had few choices, and most of them were ugly. But that wasn't his problem. What Caleb should have done was march straight back to town, find Sheriff Walsh, and let the law sort out his Katherine Mueller problem. Instead, he found himself asking, "When's the last time you ate?" The shotgun wavered. What? Food. When? She blinked, apparently thrown by the question. Yesterday morning, I think. Had some crackers I found behind the bar. Damn, he climbed down the stairs slowly, hands visible. Put the gun down. No, hello, I'm not going to hurt you. That's what they all say. But the weapon dipped slightly. Up close, he could see she was thin as a rail fence, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. The dress had been patched in several places, and her boots were more whole than leather. Who's they? Her laugh was bitter. Take your pick. The banker who said I could work off Papa's debts in special ways. The preacher who thought I needed saving through marriage to his 60-year-old brother. The rancher who offered to take me on as staff. Caleb's hands balled into fists. He'd met men like that. Hell, he'd killed a few. None of them your choice, I'm guessing. No. She wiped her nose with the back of her free hand. So I hid. Figured I'd wait them out. Maybe things would settle. 2 years is a long time to wait. Better than the alternative. He studied her face in the lamplight. Stubborn chin, eyes that held too much hurt for someone so young. She reminded him of a half-wild horse Sarah had once tried to gentle, all spirit and suspicion. I bought this place fair and square, he said finally. I know. Can't have you living in my cellar. Her grip tightened on the shotgun. Then I guess we got a problem. They stared at each other across 6 feet of dusty air. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the saloon's loose boards like old bones. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Caleb sighed. You can cook? What? Cook, food. Can you do it? Yes. Mama taught me before she died. Clean? Course I can clean. He rubbed his jaw, feeling 3 days' worth of stubble rasp against his palm. This was the stupidest idea he'd ever had, and that was saying something. Here's the deal. You cook, you clean, you stay out of my way. In return, you get a bed upstairs and 3 meals a day. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. That's it? That's it. No. Other expectations? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Sarah's face flashed through his memory. Laughing, loving, alive. The very idea of touching another woman made him sick. None. Katherine's shoulders sagged with relief so profound he had to look away. Why? Because I need a cook, and you need a place to stay. Business arrangement, nothing more. Mr. Mason, Caleb Mason. She lowered the shotgun at last, and he heard his first full breath in 5 minutes. Mr. Mason, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm not an easy man to live with. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across her lips. Neither am I. As if to prove her point, her stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. Katherine's first breakfast nearly burned the saloon down. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of creative cursing that would have made a cavalry sergeant proud. He stumbled downstairs to find the kitchen, a cramped space behind the bar, filled with gray haze and one very frustrated woman. Damn stove's got a mind of its own, she muttered, waving a dish towel at the smoke. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she'd found a cleaner dress somewhere, though it hung loose on her thin frame. When's the last time you cooked on a wood stove? He asked, opening the back door to let the smoke out. It's been a while, she admitted, poking at the charred remains of what might once have been eggs. Mama always handled breakfast. He took the pan from her hands, noting how she flinched when his fingers accidentally brushed hers. Move. For the next 20 minutes, he cooked while she watched, her brown eyes tracking his every movement like she expected him to sprout fangs. You're not what I expected, she said when he handed her a plate of perfectly cooked eggs, bacon, and biscuits. What did you expect? Someone meaner? Most men who make deals like ours want something in return. He poured coffee strong enough to wake the dead and tried not to think about how many mornings he'd cook breakfast for Sarah, how she'd hum while she set the table, how she'd kiss his cheek and tell him he made the best coffee in Wyoming. I told you what I want, food and a clean house. That's all? That's all. She took a bite of eggs and closed her eyes like she was tasting heaven. These are perfect. It's your turn tomorrow. Her eyes flew open. But you want to earn your keep, you learn to cook proper. Can't have you burning down my saloon. It's not really a saloon anymore, is it? He looked around at the empty room, chairs stacked on tables, bar mirror cracked down the middle. No, guess it isn't. What is it then? Hell if I know. After breakfast, she showed him around the upper floor, 6 small rooms that had once housed traveling salesmen and cowboys with money to burn. The furniture was mostly intact, covered in dust and mouse droppings. Papa kept 3 girls working up here, Katherine said, her voice carefully neutral. Maria, Sophie, and Belle. Good women, just limited choices. Caleb had figured as much. Every frontier saloon had the same setup. Drinks downstairs, comfort upstairs. Where'd they go? When Papa died, they moved on. Belle married a rancher up in Billings. Maria went to her sister in Denver. Sophie, Katherine's face darkened. Sheriff Walsh convinced her to leave town, said respectable folk didn't want her kind around. Walsh sounds like a real charmer. He's got opinions about proper Christian behavior, especially for women. Something in her tone made him glance at her sharply. He bother you? Tried to. Said I needed guidance from a godly man. She laughed bitterly. Funny how godly men always seem to need their guidance given in private. Caleb's jaw tightened. He was starting to get a clearer picture of why Katherine had chosen a cellar over the town's hospitality. They worked through the morning, cleaning and sorting. She was a good worker. He'd give her that. Thorough and steady, never complaining about the dust or the work. But she jumped every time he moved too fast. And she never let him get within arm's reach if she could help it. By noon, they had 3 rooms clean enough to use. Katherine had found sheets and blankets in a cedar chest, and she'd made up beds with the kind of precision that spoke of long practice. You can have your pick, she said, gesturing at the clean rooms. You choose first. Your house longer than it's been mine. She looked surprised but pointed to the smallest room at the back. That one has the best view of the mountains. He chose the room at the front where he could see anyone approaching on the main road. Old habits. That evening, Katherine's second attempt at dinner was a marked improvement. Beef stew that was only slightly oversalted, and biscuits that didn't double as building materials. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the ever-present wind outside. Mr. Mason, she said finally. Yeah? Why'd you really buy this place? He met her steady gaze across the table. Same reason you hid in the cellar, I reckon. Which is? Sometimes a person needs a place to disappear. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. But as Caleb settled into his new bed that night, listening to the soft sounds of Katherine moving around in her room, he wondered if disappearing was going to be as easy as he'd hoped. The trouble started on their 5th day together, when Sheriff Walsh decided to pay a social call. Katherine was hanging laundry on a line she'd strung between the saloon's back porch and a scraggly cottonwood when Caleb heard horses approaching. He looked out the front window to see 2 men dismounting, one wearing a tin star, the other with the soft look of a man who'd never missed a meal. Katherine, he called quietly. She appeared at his shoulder, took one look at the visitors, and went pale as fresh milk. That's Sheriff Walsh and Banker Brennan. Stay inside. Mr. Mason, son, us. Inside, now. She hesitated, then melted back into the shadows like she'd had plenty of practice disappearing. Caleb opened the door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch and pulling the door closed behind him. Both men were sweating despite the October chill, and Walsh's hand rested casual-like on his gun butt. Gentlemen? Mason. Walsh was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with mean little eyes and a mouth that looked like it had been carved by someone with a grudge against humanity. Heard you might be having some pest problems. News to me. See, that's funny. Walsh stepped closer, and Caleb caught a whiff of whiskey on his breath. Because Mrs. Henderson at the general store swears she sold you enough of supplies for 2 people yesterday. Mrs. Henderson needs spectacles. Brennan cleared his throat nervously. Now, Mr. Mason, if you're harboring Katherine Mueller, why would I harbor anyone? I don't even know anyone in this godforsaken town. Walsh's eyes narrowed. Mind if we take a look around? For your own safety, of course. Girl like that, living rough for 2 years. Well, no telling what kind of diseases she might be carrying. Caleb's hand drifted toward his holster. I mind plenty. Now see here, Walsh bristled. I'm the law in this town, and I'm a property owner who says you got no cause to search my land without a warrant. Don't need a warrant if I suspect criminal activity. What crime? Vagrancy, trespassing, contributing to moral decay. Walsh's voice rose with each word. That girl's a blight on decent Christian folks. She needs to be dealt with proper. Dealt with how? Marriage to a God-fearing man? Or, Walsh shrugged, other arrangements. The way he said it made Caleb's vision go red around the edges. Other arrangements. Woman's got to make her way somehow. Might as well be useful. Caleb studied Walsh's fleshy face for a long moment. Then he smiled, and something in that expression made both men take a step back. Sheriff, you and your friend are going to get back on your horse and ride out of here. Now you listen. No, you listen. Caleb's voice went quiet, deadly. I bought this property legal and proper. What happens on my land is my business. You come back here without a warrant, and we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Walsh's face mottled red. You threatening an officer of the law? I'm stating facts. This is Montana territory. Man's got a right to defend his property. You can't hide her forever, Walsh snarled. Hide who? Far as I know, Katherine Mueller ran off years ago. Shame, too. Heard she was a pretty little thing. For a heartbeat, Walsh looked like he might draw. Caleb hoped he would. It had been too long since he had had a reason to kill someone who deserved it. But Brennan grabbed the sheriff's arm. Come on, Earl. We've said our piece. They mounted up and rode off, but not before Walsh turned back to shout, This ain't it over, Mason. Caleb waited until they were out of sight before going back inside. He found Katherine pressed against the wall beside the window, her face chalk white and her hands shaking. How much did you hear? Enough. She straightened, trying to pull together her tattered dignity. I should go. Where? I don't know. Somewhere they won't follow. And where might that be? You got family somewhere? Friends? Her silence was answer enough. Then you're staying. Mr. Mason, you don't understand. Sheriff Walsh, he's not going to give up. And if he can't have me himself, he'll make sure no one can. Caleb looked at her. Really looked. Saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. The way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. The haunted expression that reminded him too much of trapped animals. Let me worry about Walsh. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. His voice was steel. You're under my protection now. Why? The word burst out of her like she couldn't hold it back anymore. Why would you risk trouble with the law for someone you barely know? The answer surprised him because somewhere in the last 5 days, watching her work to earn her place, seeing her try so hard to be useful while staying invisible, she'd stopped being a stranger. She'd become someone worth protecting. That night, Katherine couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching the moonlight paint silver shadows across the mountains, and tried not to think about Sheriff Walsh's cold eyes or the way he'd said other arrangements like she was livestock to be bartered. She'd been 15 when Walsh first started paying attention to him. Papa had been alive then, and the sheriff's visits had been official business, checking on the saloon's liquor license, making sure the working girls had their health certificates, collecting his monthly envelope of protection fees. But his eyes had followed Katherine even then, and she'd learned to disappear whenever she heard his boots on the front porch. After Papa died, the attention got worse. Walsh had cornered her at the funeral, his sweaty hand on her shoulder as he whispered about Christian duty and how a young woman needed guidance from a godly man. The way he'd pressed himself against her, the smell of his breath, the promises he'd made about what would happen if she came to his office after dark. She'd thrown up in the church graveyard after he finally let her go. A soft sound from downstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, careful ones, trying not to make noise. Katherine crept to her door and eased it open a crack. The saloon's main floor was dark except for moonlight streaming through the windows. She could just make out Caleb's silhouette as he moved through the room, checking locks, peering out windows, standing guard. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He was protecting her, really, truly protecting her. Not because he wanted something in return, but because, why? She still didn't understand his motives, and that scared her almost as much as Walsh did. Men didn't help women without expecting payment. She'd learned that lesson early and often, but Caleb Mason seemed determined to prove her wrong. The next morning he was up before dawn, and she found him in the kitchen making coffee strong enough to strip paint. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some." He poured her a cup without asking if she wanted one. "We need to talk." Catherine's stomach clenched. Here it comes. The payment he'd finally decided to collect. About what? About making this arrangement permanent. She set down her coffee cup so hard it rattled against the saucer. Permanent? Legal-like. Marriage. The word hit her like a slap. I... What? "In name only," he said quickly, "just on paper. Give you legal protection. Make you harder for Walsh to touch. You don't even know me. Know enough. You're honest, you work hard, and you make decent coffee when you put your mind to it. That's not enough for marriage. It's more than most folks start with." Catherine stared at him across the kitchen table. In the gray dawn light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were steady, serious. "Why would you do that?" "Told you. Legal protection." "No, really, why?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "My wife died last winter," he said finally. "I'm sorry." She was everything good in the world. Smart, funny, kind to every stray animal and lost soul that crossed her path. His voice went rough. "She'd have liked you." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Mr. Mason, point is, I'm done with love. Done with caring about someone so much it feels like dying when they leave." He met her gaze. "But I understand needing protection, and you need it more than most. A marriage of convenience. That's all it would be. Separate rooms, separate lives. Just your name on a piece of paper that says you belong to someone who can fight back." The word belong made her flinch, and he noticed. "Poor choice of words. What I mean is, I know what you meant." She did too. In a world where women were property, being owned by someone decent was better than being claimed by someone who wasn't. "I need time to think." "Course you do. But Catherine?" He stood, coffee cup in hand. "Whatever you decide, you're safe here. That doesn't change." She watched him walk away, his boots solid and reassuring on the wooden floor, and tried to figure out how her life had gotten so complicated. Outside, a rider was approaching fast, and Catherine's blood turned to ice when she recognized Sheriff Walsh's distinctive gray gelding. But this time he wasn't alone. 3 men rode with him, all armed, all wearing the kind of hard expressions that meant serious trouble. Catherine ran to find Caleb. "They're back," Catherine gasped, bursting into the main room where Caleb was cleaning his rifle. He glanced up, took in her expression, and moved to the window. 4 of them this time. Who were the others? "Muscle." Walsh brought backup. He handed her a revolver from behind the bar. "You know how to use this?" Catherine hefted the gun, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. "Papa taught me." "Good. Get upstairs, cover the stairs. Anyone comes up who isn't me, shoot them." "What about you?" "I'm going to have a conversation with the good sheriff." Before she could protest, he was already moving toward the door. Catherine grabbed his arm. "Caleb, don't." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something in his face softened. "Trust me." She wanted to, God help her. She wanted to trust this man who'd given her shelter and asked for nothing in return. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to live without. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." Catherine positioned herself at the top of the stairs, gun steady in both hands. Through the window, she could see Walsh and his men spreading out around the saloon. Caleb stepped onto the porch, and his voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Sheriff, you seem to have picked up some friends." "Deputy Walsh actually just got promoted." Walsh's voice was smug. "Gives me expanded authority to deal with troublemakers." "Congratulations. Now get off my property." "Can't do that, Mason. See, I got a sworn statement here says Katherine Mueller has been seen on these premises. That makes you guilty of harboring a fugitive. Catherine's heart stopped. A sworn statement meant paperwork, which meant Walsh could claim legal justification for whatever he did next. Fugitive from what? Caleb asked. Vagrancy, moral turpitude, corruption of public decency. Walsh was enjoying himself now. Girl needs to answer for her crimes. And what court issued a warrant? Territorial judge came through last week. Real accommodating fellow when it comes to maintaining Christian values. Katherine could hear the lie in Walsh's voice, but lies on official paper looked the same as truth. One of Walsh's men, a lean cowboy with dead eyes, started drifting toward the saloon's side door. Katherine shifted position to keep him in sight. You boys seem mighty interested in one small woman, Caleb observed. Small women cause big problems if you let them run wild, Walsh replied. Katherine Mueller's been a problem too long. Maybe she has reasons for avoiding your hospitality. Maybe she don't have a choice anymore. That's when the shooting started. The dead-eyed cowboy had found the side door, and Katherine put a bullet through the woods 6 inches from his head. He dove for cover as chaos erupted below. Caleb's rifle spoke twice, fast as lightning, and 2 of Walsh's men dropped. The sheriff himself scrambled behind a water trough, cursing loud enough to wake saints. Katherine, Caleb shouted. Status! One trying the side door. Keep him pinned. The dead-eyed man made another rush, and Katherine's second shot took him through the shoulder. He spun, fell, but came up with his gun still in his hand. That's when she realized she might have made a terrible mistake. The man's return shot splintered the banister inches from her face, and Katherine rolled sideways as more bullets chewed through the walls. Downstairs, Caleb's rifle kept talking, but she could hear Walsh shouting orders to men she couldn't see. How many were there? 4? 6? 10? Another shot shattered the window beside her, and Katherine understood with crystal clarity that they weren't trying to capture her anymore. They were trying to kill her. The realization should have paralyzed her with fear. Instead, it made her angry. She'd spent 2 years hiding in a cellar like a frightened animal. 2 years jumping at shadows and sleeping with one ear open. 2 years letting fear make her choices for her. No more, Tafa. Katherine Mueller had finally found something worth fighting for, and she'd be damned if she'd let Sheriff Walsh take it away. She steadied her grip on the revolver and prepared to make her stand. The gunfight lasted 15 minutes and felt like a lifetime. When the smoke cleared, 3 men lay dead in the dirt. Sheriff Walsh was bleeding from a head wound behind the water trough, and the dead-eyed cowboy was nowhere to be seen. Katherine found Caleb reloading his rifle on the front porch, a thin line of blood trickling from a graze across his left cheek. You hurt bad? She asked. I'll live. You? Same. She looked at the bodies scattered around the yard. Is it over? For now. Walsh struggled to his feet, pressing a bloody handkerchief to his skull. This ain't legal, he shouted. I'm a deputy sheriff. You're a dead man if you don't get off my land, Caleb replied calmly. I got jurisdiction. You got nothing. Caleb's voice was ice. You came here with armed men and started shooting. That's attempted murder in any court that matters. Who's going to testify against me? You, her? Walsh laughed bitterly. My word against a stranger and a whore's daughter. Katherine's finger tightened on her gun trigger, but Caleb caught her wrist gently. Let him talk, he murmured. Rope's getting longer. Walsh stumbled toward his horse, still ranting. You think this is over? I got friends. I got connections. I can make life real unpleasant for folks who don't show proper respect. Looking forward to it, Caleb said. After Walsh rode away, Katherine helped drag the bodies into the saloon's old root cellar. Grim work, but it had to be done. What now? She asked when they finished. Now we get married. Katherine blinked. What? Today, before Walsh can bring more trouble. Caleb, I haven't even said yes yet. He looked at her, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Respect. 3 men just tried to kill you, and you stood your ground. Put lead downrange like you meant it. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Which is? That you're this kind of woman worth having it as a partner. Partner. Not wife, not woman, not possession. Partner. Even after this? She gestured at the bloodstains on the porch. Especially after this. Katherine studied his weathered face, the gray eyes that had seen too much death, the careful way he held himself like a man, expecting the next blow to fall. What kind of marriage would it be? Honest one, we both know where we stand. And where's that? Two broken people helping each other survive. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't romance or passion or any of the things girls dreamed about. But it was real. And right now, real was more precious than gold. All right, she said. All right? I'll marry you, Caleb Mason. His smile was small but genuine. Good. Go clean up. We're riding to town. But Walsh is going to be still busy explaining to the territorial marshal why 3 of his deputies are dead. Gives us a window. An hour later, they rode into Copper Ridge like they owned the place. Katherine had found her best dress, still patched but clean, and pinned her hair up proper. Caleb wore a black coat that made him look like a preacher or an undertaker. The church was small and white, with a bell tower that had seen better days. Inside, they found Reverend Morrison, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. We'd like to be married, Caleb said without preamble. Morrison looked between them, taking in Katherine's nervous face and Caleb's grim expression. Today? Right now. Well, I suppose. Do you have rings? No. Witnesses? Just us. Morrison hesitated. Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered lightly. Reverend, Caleb interrupted gently, we understand exactly what we're doing. Something in his tone must have convinced the preacher, because Morrison nodded and reached for his Bible. The ceremony took 10 minutes. Katherine spoke her vows in a voice that barely shook, and Caleb's responses were steady as bedrock. When Morrison pronounced them man and wife, Caleb kissed her forehead, brief, chaste, respectful, like sealing a business deal. They signed the papers, paid the fee, and walked out into the afternoon sun as Mr. and Mrs. Mason. Feel any different? Caleb asked. Safer, Katherine admitted. It was only when they were riding home that she realized she'd stopped looking over her shoulder for the first time in 2 years. Marriage, Katherine discovered, was surprisingly comfortable when nobody expected it to be anything but practical. She kept her room, Caleb kept his, and they fell into routines that felt natural as breathing. He chopped wood and tended the horses. She cooked and cleaned and started a garden behind the saloon. They shared meals and conversation, worked side by side during the day, and kept a respectful distance in the evening. It was, Katherine thought, the most peaceful life she'd ever known. For 3 weeks. Then banker Brennan showed up with papers that changed everything. Mrs. Mason, he said nervously, mopping his sweaty face with a handkerchief. Might I have a word? Katherine invited him into the kitchen, served coffee, and waited. It's about your father's debts, Brennan began. I thought those died with him. Well, yes and no. See, there's been some irregularities discovered in his accounts. Katherine's stomach sank. What kind of irregularities? Heinrich borrowed heavily against this property in his final months, more than the saloon was worth, truth be told. Brennan pulled out a thick folder. These documents show he owed nearly $3,000 when he died. That's impossible. Papa never borrowed money from anyone. The signatures are here, clear as day. Brennan spread papers across the kitchen table. Now, normally such debts would die with the borrower, but since you're Heinrich's sole heir, the debts transfer to me. I'm afraid so. And since you're now married to Mr. Mason, they become his responsibility as well. Katherine stared at the documents and her hands shaking. The signatures did look like Papa's handwriting, but something felt wrong. The dates were all from Papa's final month, when he'd been so sick he could barely hold a pen. Who holds these debts? Sheriff Walsh? He bought them from various creditors, consolidated them for easier collection. Of course he had. What happens if we can't pay? Brennan's face went gray. Foreclosure. The property would be seized and sold at auction. And if no one bids high enough to cover the debt, the remainder would still be owed. Garnished from wages or... Brennan swallowed hard. Other arrangements. Katherine knew exactly what other arrangements Walsh had in mind. How long do we have? 30 days from today. After Brennan left, Katherine sat staring at the papers until Caleb found her. She explained everything in a voice that stayed steady through sheer force of will. Caleb studied the documents with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to read the fine print. These signatures look right to you? I don't know, maybe. Papa was so sick those last weeks. $3,000 is a lot of money for a dying man to borrow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Walsh is getting creative with his legal harassment. Caleb gathered the papers into a neat stack. But proving forgery is hard when the supposed signer is dead. So what do? We fight. With what? We don't have $3,000. No, but we have something else. Which is? Caleb's smile was sharp as a blade. We have the truth. The next morning they rode to the county seat in Helena, 2 days hard travel through mountain passes that were already starting to show snow. Katherine had never been so far from Copper Ridge, and the size of Helena amazed her. Real streets, brick buildings, more people than she'd ever seen in one place. The territorial courthouse was an imposing stone building that made Katherine feel small and out of place. But Caleb strode through the halls like he belonged there, asking questions and following leads with the persistence of a bloodhound. They found what they were looking for in the clerk's office: records of all loans registered in the county. Here's the problem, said the elderly clerk, a thin man with spectacles and precise handwriting. These debts show as being registered 2 weeks after Heinrich Mueller's death. Katherine felt her heart leap. That's impossible. Indeed it would be. Dead men don't sign loan documents. The clerk made a note in his letter. I'll need to investigate this further, but if these are fraudulent— What then? Caleb asked. Criminal charges, fraud, forgery, abuse of office if Sheriff Walsh was involved. The clerk looked over his glasses at them. Of course, proving it might be tricky. We have time, Caleb said. But as they rode back toward Copper Ridge, Katherine wondered if time would be enough. Walsh was getting desperate, and desperate men did dangerous things. They were 3 miles from home when the ambush came. The shot rang out from a rocky outcrop above the trail, and Caleb's hat went flying. His horse reared, and Katherine's mare shied sideways, nearly throwing her from the saddle. Down, Caleb shouted, diving from his horse and pulling Katherine with him behind a fallen log. More shots followed, kicking up dirt and splintering wood around their makeshift cover. Katherine counted muzzle flashes, at least 4 shooters positioned on the hillside above them. Professional job, Caleb muttered, checking his rifle. They've got the high ground and crossfire angles. Walsh? Has to be. Question is, how many men did he bring? Another volley of shots answered him. Too many guns to count, all aimed at keeping them pinned down while someone flanked their position. We can't stay here, Katherine said. Can't run either. They'll cut us down before we reach the horses. Katherine studied the terrain with eyes that had spent years learning to find hiding places. The trail curved around a stand of aspen trees 50 yards ahead, and beyond that, the old mine shaft, she said suddenly. What? 1/4 mile north. Papa used to take me there when I was little. There's a shaft that goes back into the hill maybe 200 feet. Dead-end trap. Not if you know about the back entrance. Caleb looked at her sharply. Back entrance? Ventilation shaft. Comes out near the creek. We could get behind them. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had. The run to the mine shaft felt like the longest 100 yards of Katherine's life. Bullets whined overhead and kicked up dirt at their feet. She felt the wind from one shot ruffle her hair, but somehow they made it to the entrance without collecting any lead. The shaft was darker than sin and smelled of old timber and bat droppings. Katherine led the way by feel, one hand on the wall, feet testing each step. Behind her, Caleb's breathing was steady but strained. How do you know this place so well? He asked quietly. Used to hide here when Papa was entertaining customers who got too friendly with the help. She felt rather than saw his nod. They both understood the reality of frontier life for young women. The ventilation shaft was a tight squeeze that opened onto a ledge overlooking the creek. From there, they could see their attackers. 6 men spread out along the hillside, all focused on the mine entrance. Walsh himself was positioned behind a boulder, directing the others with hand signals. Army training, Caleb observed. You were Army? Union cavalry. You learn to read tactical deployments or you die young. Katherine studied the men below them. What's the play? We even the odds. Caleb's voice was grim. Stay here. If things go bad, head for town and find the territorial marshal. I'm not leaving you. Katherine, we're partners, remember? Partners don't abandon each other. He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her his spare revolver. Can you use two guns at once? Papa taught me that too. Good, because we're about to find out if marriage really is till death do us part. The fight was brief and brutal. Caleb's first shot took Walsh in the shoulder, spinning him around and shattering their careful formation. Katherine's gun spoke a moment later, and two more men went down. The survivors broke and ran, carrying their wounded leader between them. As the dust settled, Katherine found herself shaking with delayed reaction. Is it over? For now. Caleb was already moving, checking bodies and collecting weapons. But Walsh won't give up. He's got too much invested in this. What do? We finish it. That night, they rode back to Helena under cover of darkness. The territorial marshal was a lean man named Harrison, with eyes like winter ice and a reputation for fairness that had kept him alive in a job where most men lasted 2 years. Katherine told him everything: the forged documents, the harassment, the ambush. Caleb provided supporting testimony and the weapons they'd taken from the attackers. I've been hearing whispers about Walsh for months, Harrison said finally, but whispers don't make a case. What about the forged loan documents? Good start, but I need more. Like what? Someone willing to testify, someone who knows Walsh's operation from the inside. Katherine and Caleb exchanged glances. We might know someone. The working girls who used to live at the saloon. If Walsh has been running a protection racket, they'd know about it. Harrison nodded slowly. Find them. Get them to talk. And Katherine? Yes, sir. Watch your back. Desperate men do desperate things. As they rode home through the pre-dawn darkness, Katherine wondered if they were finally winning the war, or just making their enemies more dangerous. Finding Maria Santos took 3 days of searching Denver's seedier neighborhoods, following leads that mostly led to dead ends and suspicious looks from folks who didn't trust strangers asking questions. They finally tracked her down in a boarding house near the railroad yards, working as a seamstress and trying to forget her past. She was a small woman with prematurely gray hair and careful eyes that missed nothing. Katherine? Maria's face went white when she opened her door. Dios mio, I thought you were dead. Not yet, Katherine replied, though some folks are working on it. Over coffee in Maria's tiny room, they explained about Walsh, the forged documents, and the ambush. Maria listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. He's gotten worse since your papa died, Maria said finally. Much worse. How so? The protection money wasn't enough anymore. He started demanding other payments. Katherine's jaw tightened. From the girls? From any woman he thought he could intimidate. The widow Henderson at the general store, young Mrs. Patterson, whose husband works the mines, even the preacher's daughter. Maria's hands shook as she reached for her coffee. He said it was his right as a lawman to collect taxes however he saw fit. Jesus, Caleb muttered, there's more. Maria glanced around nervously, as if Walsh might materialize from the shadows. He's been selling girls, bringing in runaways and orphans, then shipping them to mining camps up north. Tell the camps they're willing workers, but they're not willing. Most are barely 16, scared, hungry, no place else to go. Maria's voice broke. I tried to help one girl escape. Walsh caught us at the train station. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow. He said next time it would be my throat. Katherine felt sick. Maria, we need you to testify. The territorial marshal. No. Maria stood abruptly. I won't go back there. I can't. If we don't stop him, more girls will suffer. I'm sorry, mija, but I've paid enough already. They left Denver empty-handed, but with a clearer picture of what they were fighting. Walsh wasn't just a corrupt lawman. He was running a criminal empire that traded in human misery. 2 more names, Katherine said as they rode toward the Colorado border. Sophie and Belle. They found Belle married to a rancher named Tom Morrison in the hills north of Billings. She was pregnant with her second child and genuinely happy for the first time Katherine had ever seen her. I heard about the trouble in Copper Ridge, Belle said, serving them pie in her comfortable kitchen. Tom wanted to ride down there and settle accounts with Walsh personally. Why didn't he? Caleb asked. Tom Morrison was a big man with gentle hands and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Belle talked me out of it, said violence just breeds more violence. Sometimes violence is the only language bullies understand, Caleb replied quietly. Maybe so, but I got a family to think about now. Belle squeezed her husband's hand. Katherine, I want to help, I do, but testifying would mean going back there, and I can't. I won't risk my children. Strike two. Sophie was harder to find. They followed her trail through 3 different mining camps before learning she died of pneumonia the previous winter. Alone, forgotten, and too young to be buried in a pauper's grave. That's it then, Katherine said as they rode back toward Montana. No witnesses, no case, why? Maybe not. What do you mean? Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring at the mountains ahead. Tell me about your father's handwriting. Was he left-handed or right-handed? Right-handed. Why? The loan documents, all signed with a left-handed slant. Katherine felt her heart jump. You think they're forgeries? I think Walsh got sloppy. Question is, can we prove it? How? By finding someone who knew your father's handwriting better than anyone. Who? Caleb's smile was sharp. His banker. They rode into Copper Ridge just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains blood red. The town looked the same as always. Dusty streets, false-fronted buildings, the smell of wood smoke and horses. But something felt different. Too quiet. Too empty. Where is everyone? Katherine asked. They got their answer at the saloon. The front door hung open on broken hinges, and the interior had been torn apart. Furniture smashed, bottles broken, their few possessions scattered like leaves. On the bar mirror, someone had scrawled a message in what looked like dried blood. You have 48 hours. The destruction was methodical, professional, not the work of drunken cowboys, but of men following orders. Katherine stood in the wreckage of what had briefly been her first real home, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. They'd destroyed her books, her mother's china, the flower seeds she'd been saving for spring planting. Bastards, she whispered. Caleb was examining the broken furniture with the eye of a man who'd seen plenty of violence. They wanted to send a message without killing us outright. What message? Submit or escalate. Katherine kicked at a broken picture frame. And if we don't submit, then they escalate. They spent the night in the partially collapsed barn, taking turns on watch and planning their next move. At dawn, they rode to Brennan's house, a tidy white cottage behind the bank with rose bushes and lace curtains that spoke of feminine influence. Mrs. Brennan answered the door, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. Mr. Mason, Mrs. Mason, Tom, they're here. Brennan appeared in the doorway, looking nervously up and down the street. Get inside, quickly. The banker's parlor was decorated with religious portraits and family photographs. Brennan poured coffee with shaking hands, while his wife fussed over their appearance. You look terrible, Mrs. Brennan declared. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? Yesterday morning, Katherine admitted. Tom, shame on you. These young people are skin and bones. While Mrs. Brennan bustled off to prepare food, Brennan leaned forward conspiratorially. Walsh has gone completely mad, he whispered. He's declared martial law, says you're dangerous criminals who threaten public safety. Based on what authority? Caleb asked. His own. The territorial marshal isn't due back for 2 weeks, and Walsh is acting like he owns the town. What about the other business owners? The city council? Brennan's laugh was bitter. What council? Half the members have left town. The other half are too scared to oppose him. Katherine set down her coffee cup. Tom, we need to ask you something about my father's handwriting. Heinrich, what about it? You handled his banking for years. You'd recognize his signature, wouldn't you? Of course, why? Caleb pulled out the loan documents. Take a look at these. Brennan studied the papers, his face growing increasingly puzzled. This is very strange. The signatures. They look like Heinrich's hand, but he held one document up to the light. The angle is wrong. Heinrich wrote with a distinctive forward slant. Legacy of his German schooling. These signatures lean backward. Different hand? Has to be. Someone practiced Heinrich's signature but couldn't master the slant. Brennan looked up. These are forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Would you testify to that? In court, against Walsh? Brennan wiped his sweating face. You're asking me to sign my own death warrant. Tom, Mrs. Brennan said from the doorway, what's this about death warrants? Nothing, dear, just business. Don't you nothing dear me, Thomas Brennan. I've been married to you for 23 years, and I know when you're frightened. Reluctantly, Brennan explained about the forged documents and Walsh's escalating corruption. Mrs. Brennan listened with growing indignation. That man has terrorized this town long enough, she declared. Tom, you're going to help these young people. Meredith, if I testify, then we'll face whatever comes together, like we always have. Brennan looked at his wife's determined face and sighed. Very well, I'll testify. There's just one problem, Katherine said. We need to get the documents to Helena without Walsh intercepting them. Leave that to me, Mrs. Brennan said briskly. Tom's cousin runs the stage line to Helena. He owes us a favor. Meredith, you can't get involved. I'm already involved. That monster has made prisoners of us all. 2 hours later, the documents were on their way to Helena, hidden in a bag of flour on the morning stage. Katherine and Caleb prepared to follow, but Mrs. Brennan had other ideas. You're staying here tonight, she announced. Both of you, a hot meal and a proper bed, and I won't hear any arguments. Ma'am, we can't involve you further. Young man, I've made my decision. Besides, she smiled grimly, I suspect Walsh won't look for you here. That evening, as they sat around the Brennans' table eating pot roast and fresh bread, Katherine felt something she'd almost forgotten. The warmth of family, the security of being genuinely wanted. Thank you, she told Mrs. Brennan, for everything. Don't thank me yet, dear. The real fight hasn't even started. As if summoned by her words, boots thundered up the front porch and someone pounded on the door. Open up! Sheriff's business! Walsh had found them. Back door, Brennan whispered urgently. But it was too late. Heavy boots surrounded the house, and through the lace curtains, they could see rifle barrels glinting in the lamplight. Thomas Brennan! Walsh's voice carried clearly through the door. Open up, or I'll break it down. Mrs. Brennan straightened her apron with the dignity of a queen preparing for battle. Tom, let him in. Meredith, let him in. We've done nothing wrong. Brennan opened the door with trembling hands, and Walsh strode into the parlor like he owned it. He'd traded his usual uniform for a black coat and silver badge that caught the light like a warning. His shoulder was bandaged where Caleb had shot him, and his eyes held the flat shine of a man who'd moved beyond law into something darker. Evening, folks. Walsh's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Nice family gathering you got here. What do you want, Sheriff? Mrs. Brennan's voice was steady as granite. Just came to collect some fugitives. Mr. and Mrs. Mason, you're under arrest. For what crime? Caleb asked quietly. Take your pick. Assault on a peace officer, destruction of property, conspiracy to defraud. Walsh's grin widened, resisting arrest. We haven't resisted anything yet. Yet being the operative word. Katherine stood slowly, her hand drifting toward the gun under her shawl. And if we come quietly? Then the Brennans don't suffer for harboring criminals. Earl, Mrs. Brennan said sharply, you've known me since you were in short pants. Don't you dare threaten me in my own home. Times change, Meredith, so do loyalties. Some things don't change, like right and wrong. Walsh's expression darkened. Right and wrong are what I say they are. That's where you're mistaken, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Marshal Harrison standing in the entrance, his badge reflecting lamplight and his hand resting casually on his gun butt. Behind him stood two deputies, both armed and alert. Walsh's face went through several interesting colors. Marshal, didn't expect to see you back so soon? I'll bet you didn't. Harrison stepped into the parlor, his eyes taking in the scene. Got some interesting documents delivered to my office this afternoon. Thought I'd come investigate personally. What documents? Forged loan papers, signed by a dead man. Harrison's smile was winter cold. Amazing how the dead keep conducting business in your territory, Sheriff. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Heinrich Mueller's signature on documents dated 2 weeks after his funeral. Takes real talent to arrange that kind of business meeting. Walsh's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when both deputies shifted their stance. Careful, Earl. You're already looking at fraud charges. Don't add attempted murder of a federal marshal to the list. This is my jurisdiction. Not anymore. Harrison pulled out an official-looking document. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation. Your badge, gun, and authority are hereby transferred to my office. You can't do this. I just did. For a moment, the room balanced on a knife's edge. Walsh's face twisted with rage, his hand twitching toward his weapon. Outside, more horses approached. Walsh's remaining men probably, responding to some prearranged signal. But Mrs. Brennan chose that moment to pour herself another cup of coffee, the domestic sounds somehow diffusing the tension. Marshal, she said pleasantly, would you and your men care for some pot roast? There's plenty. Harrison's stern expression cracked celestially. That's very kind, ma'am, but we have work to do. He nodded to his deputies, who moved to flank Walsh. Earl Walsh, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, extortion, and conspiracy. You have the right to— Walsh bolted. He knocked over a chair, shoved past Mrs. Brennan, and lunged for the back door. But Caleb was faster, tackling him in the kitchen doorway. They went down hard, grappling among the scattered furniture. Walsh was desperate and dangerous, but Caleb had been fighting for his life longer. A short, brutal exchange ended with Walsh unconscious on Mrs. Brennan's kitchen floor, his nose bleeding onto her clean linoleum. Sorry about the mess, ma'am, Caleb said, breathing hard. Mrs. Brennan surveyed her damaged kitchen and smiled. Nothing that won't clean up, dear. As the deputies dragged Walsh away, Marshal Harrison turned to Katherine and Caleb. You two have caused me considerable paperwork, he said. We're sorry, Pshaw. Don't be. Sometimes paperwork is worth it. He touched his hat brim. You're free to go home. What's left of it. Later, as they rode back to the ruins of the saloon under a sky thick with stars, Katherine felt something that she'd never experienced before. Peace. It's over, she said wonderingly. This part is, Caleb agreed. Question now is what comes next. Katherine looked at the man who'd married her for protection and ended up giving her so much more. What do you want to come next? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Something I never thought I'd want again. Which is? A future. 6 months later, Katherine Mason stood in the garden behind what was no longer the Devil's Den Saloon, watching her husband fix the fence that would keep their chickens from wandering. The building had been rebuilt, but not as a saloon. The main room now served as a community meeting hall, the upstairs rooms housed traveling families, and the old bar had become Katherine's kitchen counter. They'd painted the whole place white with blue trim, and Mrs. Brennan had donated rose bushes that were already starting to bloom. Mrs. Mason? A young voice interrupted her thoughts. Katherine turned to find Emma Patterson, the preacher's daughter, holding a basket of fresh bread. At 17, Emma was pretty and eager and reminded Katherine painfully of herself at that age. If she'd been allowed to be 17 instead of hunted. Mrs. Henderson sent this over, Emma said, then hesitated. Ma'am, could I ask you something? Of course, dear. How did you know that Mr. Mason was safe, I mean? Katherine understood the question. Word had spread about what Walsh had done, what he'd planned, and the young women in town were looking at their few marriage prospects with new wariness. I didn't know, Katherine said honestly. Not at first. I had to learn to trust him. But how? Katherine thought about those first days when she'd held a shotgun on the man who would become her husband. He never asked for anything he hadn't earned, never took anything I wasn't ready to give. And when I was scared, he stood between me and danger without being asked. That's all? That's everything. Emma nodded thoughtfully and headed back toward town. Katherine watched her go, remembering when the world had seemed that complicated. Deep thoughts? Caleb asked, joining her in the garden. Just thinking about trust. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? Grateful thoughts. He slipped his arm around her waist, a gesture that had become natural over the months of their strange courtship. They'd moved slowly, carefully, learning each other like reading a book in a foreign language. But somewhere along the way, partnership had become friendship, and friendship had become something deeper. Marshall Harrison stopped by while you were visiting the Brennans, Caleb said. News about Walsh? Trial's set for next month. Harrison thinks he'll get 20 years in the territorial prison. Good. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The town below looked peaceful in the evening light. Smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in the streets, couples walking together without looking over their shoulders. Caleb? Yeah? Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean. He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. Only one thing I regret. Catherine's heart stuttered. What? That it took us so long to figure out this wasn't just business anymore. His kiss was gentle, patient, full of the promise of time they now had to discover what lay beyond survival. When they broke apart, Katherine rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered, the words still new enough to taste like wonder. I love you too. It wasn't the desperate passion of dime novels or the dramatic declarations of stage plays. It was something better. Steady, real, built on a foundation of respect and tested in fire. 3 days later, Katherine woke to find Caleb already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. What is it? She asked. Riders coming. Looks like Marshall Harrison and... He paused. And a woman. The woman turned out to be Judge Sarah Montgomery, the first female territorial judge, and a woman with a reputation for fairness that had earned her respect across the frontier. Mrs. Mason, Judge Montgomery said when introductions were complete, I've come to offer you a position. A position? The territory needs advocates for women in situations like yours once was. Someone to help them navigate the legal system, find safe housing, connect them with resources. The judge smiled. Someone who understands what they're facing. Katherine looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. I'd have to travel sometimes, Katherine said. We'd manage, Caleb replied. Besides, someone's got to keep these frontier sheriffs honest. 6 months after that, Katherine Mason was sworn in as the first female victim advocate in Montana Territory. Her first case was helping a young widow in Billings, whose late husband's business partners were trying to cheat her out of her inheritance. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of fight she'd been training for all her life. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the stars appear over the mountains, Caleb asked, Any regrets about taking the job? None. Katherine leaned against his shoulder. Feels like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. What's that? Helping people find their way home. And in the comfortable silence that followed, surrounded by the life they'd built from broken pieces and stubborn hope, Katherine Mason knew she was exactly where she belonged. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine in telling it, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear that broken people can build beautiful things together. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about wounded souls helping each other heal. Until our next adventure together, take care of yourselves and remember, you're stronger than you know.